Here's a rough overview of the types of digital support that we offer: Google Ads support, SEO, Meta, data, conversion rate optimization. As an agency, we work with quite a lot of different nonprofits and different charities throughout the UK and occasionally abroad. So today we're going to be talking about what you can do as an organization with your content to help drive traffic to your website and to help better serve your beneficiaries. Crucially, we are talking about the type of content that you are subject matter experts in, the type of thing that you know very, very well about. I'm just going to also broadly define here about SEO. SEO is search engine optimization. For those that aren't familiar with SEO, it's the practice of basically improving your website, making it a lot better. And by doing that, you are ultimately helping search engines to rank your content. So the principles of SEO and the principles of building great content, they're one and the same thing. That's something that Rob and I are going to be talking quite a lot about today. So why is content important? Content is one of the 3 pillars of SEO. And I'm going to talk a little bit about those 3 pillars. Firstly, we've got the technical foundation of your site. We've got the entire setup of your site and the way that search engines and users are able to access your content. Secondly, we have backlinks, which act as votes of trust in your website. Links from one website to another, they basically tell search engines and users that this website is legitimate, it's authentic. But thirdly, and most importantly, we've got content, the actual content on your website. And this is usually the area that you as an organization have the most control over. There's going to be a few people in your organization that might deal with the technical issues and some that might deal with backlinks, but perhaps your PR team, for example. But a lot of you at the organization are going to be dealing with content, and it's something that can grow so that many different teams in the organization will have an input in content. So that's why it's really, really important. But it's also important because you as an organization are subject matter experts in this thing that you do. You know the most about it, probably in the country, maybe even the world sometimes. And so it's really important that you, one, get that content out there, that expertise on paper, but 2, use it as a way to actually benefit you as an organization, use it as a way to drive traffic to your website and serve your beneficiaries. There are so many benefits from using your content in this way. There's a little point here as well about how you may not be able to, as an organization, as a charity, to serve all of your beneficiaries with a helpline, for example, or with your services. But if you have content on your website, you can also use that to give advice and support and resources, that type of thing. So there's many different roles that content plays in your website overall. As an organization, often it is one of your objectives, your organizational objectives, to inform and educate your audience and people that are interested in that subject matter. If you're dealing with perhaps an issue that could use much more awareness, it's your role as an organization to inform and educate on that subject matter, inform that audience. So even if that content doesn't drive donations directly, it can still be really, really impactful for just fulfilling that one goal of educating and informing. That's something that's very, very unique to the charity sector. Often just by having that piece of content live, you've already got that win, essentially. But then other roles that it plays is that it raises awareness of your services and who you are as an organization, the type of things that you do as an organization. But it also drives conversions, things like donations, signups, campaign signups, petitions, event signups, fundraising, even newsletter signups, anything that you're looking for people to do on your website. Content can generate traffic and funnel them down to taking an action. And that looks a little bit like this. This is the type of strategy that we really, really encourage with content, is to, in an ideal world, you would love people to come straight into your donate fundraising pages, campaign pages, but it's not always that easy to do. We really want people to Google donate to X, Y, and Z, but not that many people do Google that to take a direct action. In fact, the more people search for broad informational search terms. When we talk about informational search terms, we're talking about people asking questions, People want answers, people want information, people want advice, guides, resources. This is content, this is information, and you can use that information to be the top of your funnel. The top of your funnel generates users in, and then you slowly take them down to taking an action. Of course, a percentage of those people will go on to take an action, but the vast majority won't. And that's absolutely fine. It's a case of producing that content and having that expectation that over the long term, 5-10 years, you produce this content, it will have an immeasurable impact over the long term. In an ideal world, they then go on to take the action, and then even in an even more ideal world, they'll go on to become a loyal supporter and an advocate for your organization as well. So in the long term, that piece of content that you are producing plays a really, really good multifaceted role. It's also really, really good for search engines. So everything that we talk about user experience and search engines as being one and the same thing. We don't ever want to use the term, let's create some SEO content. It's all about creating helpful content, good content, content that's really going to benefit our audience. It's going to be really, really relevant to what we do. And as a result, it's really good for search engines. Google have released their one of their most recent algorithm updates, and it was called the Helpful Content Update. And it really focused on content that was user first. It wasn't just written for SEO. It wasn't written to try and to scam the search engines into ranking them higher or anything like that. It's content that is written authentically, showing your expertise, showing how much of an authority subject matter you are in this subject. And so we know that content is really, really important for search engines when it shows your expertise. So we've spoken a little bit about why content is really important for your organization and the impact that it can have over the long term. And in this training session, what we really want to do is talk about how you go about creating great content, what the process would be for doing that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple of the first stages, well, just the very first stage, and then I'll hand over to Rob, who's going to talk about the final process for doing that. So this is the process that we would typically recommend you use for creating great content, and we'll go through each of these one by one. So the first is brainstorm, the second is planning, third is build, fourth publish, fifth measure, and then sixth review. So I'll first talk about brainstorming. The very, very first step when you as an organization want to try to figure out what type of content you should produce on the website is to try and gather as much data as possible. And you're going to filter that data down eventually, which is stage 2. But in the initial period, you need to find different ways to gather data. Internal ideas are one of the really great untapped resources. And that's because internally you have things like frontline staff, you have an internal strategy, you have an understanding of who your audience are, who your beneficiaries are. You also have your internal staff who have a long knowledge of what's happened in the past. What are people asking about? What comes through on the call lines? What happens in service centers? You have things like existing content and content that you previously used to have. Your digital team might have a very long memory of that as well. And you can use that to identify gaps, things that you've spoken about before, ideas that came up in the past. You can also use the data from your internal site search. You can find what are people looking for on your site. If you are a charity about a certain specific condition, for example, people might be looking for treatments for specific condition or causes of specific condition. And that might give you some information to say, actually, there's justification that people are searching for this. So therefore, we should probably produce that content. And then with your website strategy, you have the objective. You are strategically, as an organization, trying to as we spoke about before, educate and inform users about this issue. So how does this objective play into what content you could go and produce? And then you have external ideas, things that happen outside of your organization, things that happen on things like social media, Facebook groups or Twitter communities. Reddit is really good for very, very niche communities about a subject matter, or even if you search Google for a phrase plus Reddit, you can find threads where they talk about a specific issue that you might want to write about. And the same with Quora as well. If you use Google to search for Reddit or Quora questions, you can also probably see the people also ask feature as well, and you can use that to generate more and more ideas. And just keep noting all of these down. Every time that you come across a new idea, just write it down, and you may decide at the end to get rid of that idea. But this phase is all about gathering as much data as possible, and then at the end going through that data and trying to whittle down the good ideas. Competitor research is another way to generate ideas. Basically, just go through your competitor websites, go through any website in the same industry, the same niche as you, and try to understand what they are writing about. Look at their blog and look at their core content. What are the main areas of expertise that they are covering on the website, and write down every single idea that you can find there. And then next, I'm going to hand over to Rob, because we're talking about how to actually whittle that content down into something usable. Rob, I'm going to hand over to you to share your screen. I'm just going to stop now.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Tom. Yes, that was fantastic. I think really good oversight of how you can sort of gather a whole load of ideas and brainstorm a whole load of ideas and just really understand what it is that your organization wants to be talking about as a whole. So I'll be talking about how to then take that and turn it into a bit more of an actionable plan. So what we like to talk about is taking your big list of sort of brainstorm topics and turning them into content topics. So your initial brainstorm might have a lot of sort of content areas that overlap, or they might have a lot of maybe not 100% thought out ideas. It's sort of a vague idea or something that you might want to be talking about. But the sort of the next stage after that is to how do we actually turn that into a content topic? So the best thing to do for that is to look for common themes between your ideas. There might be certain keywords or phrases that sort of come together quite frequently that you can say, right, that might be a sort of a content topic. You might find a really large idea, so a sort of a really broad topic that's fundamental to your organization, but actually you could turn that into potentially smaller topics and subtopics within that. It can sometimes be a little bit difficult to understand when do you have one big page that covers everything on a topic, and when do you separate that into smaller topics. And the sort of rule of thumb that we tend to work on is if the subtopic would take about 500 or more words to explain and sort of cover in detail, then we'd probably split it out into its own separate page. So yeah, that's probably a good rule of thumb to work on. And then also at this stage, when you're sort of finalizing your content topics and saying these are all the sort of the content ideas that we think we could start talking about over the next 12 months, starting producing content for, is to just try and make sure that everyone is on board in that sort of content production process. So you don't want to get through and sort of plan loads and loads of content and go into really lots of detail into each of those content ideas without having sort of final sign off from those people who might be approving the content that goes on the site, or the experts internally, you know, if they have an issue with a certain thing, or maybe it's something that they think, oh, actually there's an additional content topic that we could talk about there. It's good to just make sure that everyone's sort of aligned and on the same page at the planning stage. So hopefully at this point you have sort of organized your brainstorming into more of a consolidated list of actual content ideas that you want to talk about. And the next thing we want to do is sort of validate those content topics with keyword research. So we want to make sure, as Tom said, that SEO is very much about understanding what users are searching for. You know, we're not generating our own demand. We're not generating our own awareness of keywords that, you know, making people search for new things. We're just trying to understand what it is people are already searching for and trying to tailor our content to make sure that the content that you're producing is meeting those requirements for those users. So the way in which we do that is through keyword research. There's two sort of broad ways in which you can do that. There's paid tools and there's free tools. I think the paid tools generally have a slightly larger data set and generally make things a little bit easier and quicker to sort of do large scale keyword research. But that's not to say that you can't do it through sort of free or freemium tools. So we've listed a couple there, and some of these hopefully you might be familiar with already. So you can look at things like Google Search Console for the content that you already have. You can look through the keywords that you rank for, and you might actually say, oh, this is a sort of keyword that we haven't optimized the page for, but actually it's really relevant to the content that's on there, and that's why it's ranking for that. How do we incorporate that keyword into the existing content to sort of help it rank even better for that? You can use the Google Keyword Planner, which is part of the Google Ads platform. That sort of helps to give quite broad keyword search volume ranges. And then you've got things like Ubersuggest and Keyword Surfer. These are sort of more freemium models where you might get a certain number of searches per day or per week before you start having to pay. But I think for sort of smaller scale keyword research, it's totally fine to use that sort of tool to sort of help you understand what it is that people are searching for. And so the keyword research is really just about understanding all the different ways in which people might be searching for the topic that you're hoping to create. You know, what's the sort of language that they use? Are there any sort of synonyms that people use for phrases that you don't use internally? It's really understanding everything that people are searching for around that topic to guide your creation of the content. I think it's important to note that even if you find a topic that you're really keen to have on your website, and then you do some keyword research to validate that, but you don't see any sort of search volume related to the topic, that doesn't necessarily mean you shouldn't create that content for the site. It just means that it won't play a key role in driving additional organic traffic to your site. But it could be that it's really beneficial for someone to justify their donation to your organization. It might be, what do we do with the money that you give to us? That sort of content often doesn't have keyword search volume related to it, but it can be a key sort of touch point in the process of someone donating to your organization. So even if the content doesn't have search volume, it doesn't mean it shouldn't be put on your site at all. So once you've then validated all your content ideas and sort of have an understanding of what content people are searching for, what's really relevant to your site, the best thing to do in terms of actioning that is creating a content calendar. So this is what we do very often with our clients, is that we get a load of topics and then we plan out what are the most important things, what are the most important pieces of content we want to be working on first. And oftentimes people might think that, oh, if you've done the keyword research and you say, this topic has 10,000 potential searches per month, therefore we must put that first. That's not always how we would recommend doing it. I think there's a lot of other factors and things to consider when you're planning out your content calendar. So for example, things like content relevance. If you find that a topic that is sort of tangentially related to what your organization does has a lot of keyword search volume, that doesn't necessarily align quite as closely as sort of a core piece of content for your site. And perhaps you might prioritize that core piece of content first, making sure that sort of everything that your organization is doing is fully represented, and then maybe start talking about those tangential topics. You might also want to look at things like your direct search competitors. Often we find that some keywords are much more competitive than others. I think, if you're an organization that focuses on sort of quite a niche topic, then you're probably more likely to face less competition for your keywords that you're trying to target. But if you're doing quite a broad piece of content, maybe it's something on mental health, there's a lot of organizations, a lot of charities trying to rank for those sorts of keywords. And therefore, the sort of harder to rank for topics might not be where you start. Maybe you start with sort of content pieces that are easier to rank for, get the sort of ball rolling and make sure that traffic's coming in, and then start looking to develop that sort of more competitive content. You can also look at things such as seasonal topics or current affairs if you know there might be changes in legislation relating to the core issue that you work on. You can plan your content around that. If there's particular trends in the season, so if there's something around Christmas, if there's a lot of issues that your beneficiaries face around that sort of time, you can plan the content around those points in the calendar. And then also, of course, your own sort of site and digital strategy. If you know there's a new area of services being released, or if there's a particular core focus on a particular issue that sort of other digital teams are focusing on, then you can, again, build your content around that sort of plan. So hopefully, it's not just about the keyword search volume. Obviously, it'd be great to rank for all the sort of top volume keywords and sort of see huge traffic to your site. But oftentimes it's best to think about all these other considerations when planning out your content calendar. So this is just a brief example of the exact process that we've done for a client before. So we use a tool called Miro for a sort of brainstorming session. So we got a number of stakeholders from their team, from the digital team, and wider stakeholders, senior leaders, frontline staff. We got them all together to do a big brainstorming session of all the types of content that they might want to produce. We then took that away and put that into a sort of keyword research process, validating the topics as I've just covered, making sure that we understand what is people are searching for, if there's any related topics that we hadn't maybe thought of. And then we plan that out into a strategic content calendar. So this gave us, I think it was 16 months worth of content to be producing in collaboration with that client. And it was fully signed off and sort of really helped ease the content production process. I think previously it might have been a bit ad hoc, and after this point we sort of had a strategic layout of what we wanted to do and already had the keyword research in order to allow us to build that content really quickly. So yeah, it's quite a good process for creating a more structured approach to your content. So then moving on to actually creating and building your content, how do you go about doing that? So I think there's a lot of considerations when you're actually putting the content together, and the content structure is pretty fundamental to that. When you see, you go into the search results, you search for something related to your charity, and you see the sort of top ranking results. That top page is what the search engines, Google, Bing, whatever it is, that top page is what they think is providing the best answer to that keyword. And oftentimes it's the most comprehensive or most useful page related to that keyword that ranks at the top. So I think it's something that we really try and encourage, is making sure that your content that you're producing is sort of as comprehensive as possible. You don't want to sort of touch on topics quite broadly and then not go into too much detail, not cover all the potential questions that someone might have. Actually answering the questions that a user might have, not just sort of giving the initial answer, but maybe providing answers to follow-up questions that they might have after reading that initial piece of content is really, really useful. So to do that, it's obviously really important, as Tom said before, to try and leverage your internal expertise. That's really the sort of differentiator, I think, for your content versus other content on the same sort of topics. You utilize your internal expertise, use the people that are talking about this day in, day out, use their insights that, no one else has. And that's the sort of thing that Google and other search engines are really looking for, is to, not just see all the content that sort of vaguely says the same thing, but actually this is the authoritative piece of content on that topic. There's other things you can do as well in terms of the content structure. So you can have a really comprehensive piece of content, but if you're not structuring the page as sort of easily readable as possible, then that might prevent users from really engaging with that content. So on the left-hand side there, we've given a sort of example of how to use headings. So using heading tags is really important, having a sort of a title of an H1 tag, and then moving down into sort of your subtopics with an H2, and then your subtopics with an H3, and so on. It really helps users to sort of understand the structure of your content and skim through that content to find the content that's really relevant to them, find the section that they're looking for. We would also really encourage making sure that your opening paragraph is well optimized. So oftentimes, if you're creating a piece of informational content, it could be what is X, it could be what is anxiety, and therefore your opening paragraph should often contain anxiety is, or the topic is. If you're answering the user's question in that opening paragraph, that's often a really, really good tactic and a really good thing to do for organic search. And also making sure that you're utilizing sort of the main keywords on that you're trying to target for that page in that opening paragraph as well. That's often a really useful way of making sure that your keywords are sort of prime front and center on your content. Throughout the sort of building of your content, you should always try and refer back to the keyword research that you've done before. So understanding all the different ways in which users are searching and trying to understand the topic that you're talking about. to structure your content. As Tom said before, it could be symptoms or treatment for something, and they might have specific questions on certain types of symptoms or treatment that you weren't generally aware of, or that doesn't exist on your current content. The keyword research can really give you that insight into what people are actually searching for, so that you can tailor your content to those users. And then finally, you can understand your search competitors. So just taking a look at the sort of the main keyword, putting it into the search engine and seeing what the top current competitors, what the top current pages are doing, taking a look at the content on their site and saying, are there any sort of gaps in the content that you had planned? Are there any topics or subtopics that you think that you could add to your own page? And again, utilize your internal expertise to provide the answer for, rather than sort of paraphrasing or copying anything. That's not what we're looking for here. It's just understanding if there's any gaps in your current content. So something else that's really important, I think with a lot of things, it's not just what you say, it's how you say it. It's the readability of your content. So I think the average reading age in the UK is that of a 9-year-old, and therefore if your content isn't written in a way that is accessible and readable to those to the majority of users, you can have the best content in the world in terms of its technical and comprehensive depth, but if people aren't able to engage with that content, then it's not going to perform in the way that you're hoping. It's not going to inform and educate, or it's not going to lead to conversions further down the road. So I think some good examples of some really readable content that covers quite complex topics is from the NHS or the government website. You can see some really sort of heavy hitting and complex topics written on those websites, but it's the way in which they write that really allows everyone to access that information. So things like your sentence structure, making sure that you're using sort of short sentences with not too many commas, using things like lists can be really helpful, making sure that the language that you're using on the page isn't overly complicated. All these sorts of things really help to make sure that your content is readable. And then as just a little tip, there's an application called the Hemingway Editor that's free. So you can just copy and paste content into that app, and it will tell you the sort of the readability of that content and make suggestions on how you can improve your sentence structure, language, all those sorts of things to get it down to a more accessible level for everyone. So yeah, readability is definitely useful to consider. And then I thought it would be good to just flash up a good example of content that sort of does all the things I've just mentioned. So this is a page from Mind talking about anxiety and panic attacks, and this does pretty much everything that I've just mentioned. So it uses headings effectively. You can see the top title there of anxiety and panic attacks, and then a subheading of what is anxiety. That again makes it really easy for people to understand what the page is about, what certain sections of the page are about. Hopefully you can see that there's a list of subtopics on the left-hand side, and this just represents that it's a really comprehensive article that covers a number of subtopics, things like symptoms, causes, treatment, self-care, all these sorts of things that users might go, what is anxiety? And then, I have other questions about what causes anxiety. That's already there on the page. It's a really, really comprehensive piece of content. We can also see that the opening paragraph is well optimized. It uses sort of the key keywords, things like anxiety. It's also really easy to read. It's sort of quite short sentence structure and accessible language that's used there as well. And then finally, they also use a quote underneath that opening paragraph. And this lends itself towards that unique perspective that search engines are often looking for, that sort of differentiator between you and other pieces of content. So this is Mind using their own sort of beneficiaries and their own expertise in the context that they have to sort of represent that on the website and really demonstrate themselves as sort of being experts and understand the topic comprehensively. Great. So then hopefully that's a useful overview of how to actually build content and sort of things to consider when planning it out. But then taking a look at publishing your content as well. It's not just a case of setting and forgetting. Unfortunately, we generally recommend that you publish your content in quite a planned and considered approach. So oftentimes in the content planning stage, when you're creating your content calendar, you might see content topics that are related to one another. It's often a good idea to try and publish that related content at the same sort of time. And the reason that we do that is that you can link to those related pieces of content from one another. And that creates what we like to call is a content silo. So say, for example, you had a new area of content on your site that you hadn't talked about before. If you just release one page on that piece of content, then it might give some sort of indicator to search engines and to users that you have an expertise and an understanding of that topic. But if you're creating a number of pieces of content that are all really comprehensive and all linked to one another, it's a really clear indication that you're sort of have a comprehensive piece of content and comprehensive understanding of that topic, and that you have multiple pieces of content supporting that. And by linking all those pages together, you really showcase that quite effectively. And then, of course, organic search isn't the only traffic channel. You want to make sure that the content that you've put a lot of work into is utilized by other channels. So making sure that it's featured in sort of email outreach or social media, or utilized by your paid ads. All these sorts of things really help to make sure that your content isn't just focused on SEO. As we said before, we don't want to create SEO content. We want to create good content that is really engaging for everyone to use. So if you're publishing it on your social channels and you're using it in your email marketing, and it's engaging content, it's good quality content, then it'll perform well on all those channels as well. So then finally, or not quite finally, we want to measure and understand how your content is performing once you've published it. So oftentimes people will take a look at organic traffic as the sort of one and only metric to see how their sort of organic content is performing. Looking at things like page views or clicks in Google Search Console is a good way of understanding broadly how your content is performing, but it's definitely not the be all and end all. I think there's a lot more detail that you want to go into, and a lot of other metrics to understand, to really gauge whether your content is performing quite how you'd expected it to. So, for example, say you'd created an awareness piece of content. It's sort of a informational piece of content that you want to use to educate and inform users. Taking a look at something like time on page could be a useful metric to look at there, to really make sure that the people visiting the page are engaging with the content. It could be a 2,000 word comprehensive article on a topic, but if the average time on page is only 15 seconds, you can probably understand that your content isn't being engaged with in quite the way that you'd hoped. And therefore, maybe there are changes that you can make to make it more accessible, more readable, or change the structure of it to make sure that it's really easy for people to understand what the content is. So time on page might be a useful one. Similarly, it might be a top of funnel article, and you want to encourage people to click through to your more transactional pages. So it might be an awareness piece that you're hoping will lead to donations or leading up to fundraisers or event signups. Something like pages per visit could be a useful metric to understand there, to see if users are generally just jumping on that page and then that's it, or if they're doing something like clicking through to another page and then another page off the back of that initial entrance from your content. Keyword ranking positions is obviously really, really important to search engine optimization. You could see a load of traffic from to your new content and think that's really performing really well, but actually if you dive into the keywords that it's ranking for, they might be on unrelated subjects, or they might not be the sort of keywords that you're trying to target, and therefore the content again maybe isn't performing quite as you'd anticipated and hoped, and maybe there are some actions off the back of that to try and really hone in on those keywords that you are trying to target and move away from the sort of unrelated keywords. And then it's important, of course, to look at goal completions. So if you're looking at content on a transactional sort of donation page or fundraiser page, is the changes that you're making, is the content that you're putting on that page leading to those goal completions that you're hoping for? So hopefully it's not just looking at the page views or the organic traffic as a whole. It's really breaking it down and understanding what's the purpose of your content, what are the sort of key metrics that would showcase that content is meeting its criteria and meeting the intention that we published it for. So I think it's important to try and consider when will you see the impact, or when will you see the results of your content once you've published it. And to use the classic SEO phrase, it does depend. I think SEO is often seen as quite a long form channel. You publish something and then 12 months later it might start taking off and might start generating traffic. And that can happen, but also you can make a change to a piece of content and, you might see an impact overnight. You might see your keywords starting to, your traffic, starting to increase sort of overnight. So it really does depend. I think generally speaking, I would try to encourage, once you've published a piece of content, to look at the performance after 1 month, and then 3 months, and then 6 months, and then 12 months. I think each of those sort of touch points really gives your content enough time to bed in and to get an understanding of how it's actually performing over time. I don't think if you release a piece of content and it's not performing within the first month, you say, oh, actually, let's scrap that content, we'll remove that, or maybe we'll change it completely. I'd say definitely hold off on that, leave it at least 6 months to sort of give it time to settle in, make sure that, there's other pages on your site that are linking to that piece of content, that the content is understood by both users and by search engines. And there's an example in the screenshot below where we had a sort of section on a site for one of our clients, and we added a new piece of content to that site section. And nothing happened for the first 3 months. And then all of a sudden it sort of started taking off and started seeing traffic increases. And this is just something that happens sometimes with SEO. It takes search engines a little bit of time to sort of fully comprehend and bed in your new content, and then it can take off. So I just recommend not rushing into decisions based off traffic after the first month or two. Definitely give it some time to bed in. Also, I think it's useful to always try and keep in the back of your mind that you're competing against yourself. Oftentimes, after the keyword research, you'll say, well, this topic has, 7,000 potential monthly searches. Why are we not seeing all 7,000 monthly searches coming to our site? But oftentimes, especially if you're optimizing content, you're competing against your past performance, and you want to make sure that you understand if you're improving upon that rather than trying to obtain that full 7,000 search volume every single month. So this is just a screenshot from Google Search Console on a piece of content that was optimized. The sort of dotted line was the previous month, and then the solid blue line was the performance after the content had been optimized, and you can see that the number of clicks to that page had increased versus the previous month. So I think it's always, it's not just looking at the total potential search volume, it's looking at your past performance and assessing yourself against that. And then finally, something that's really important and often overlooked in the impact of organic content or content in general is the sort of the multi-channel conversions. So looking at how your content has been used throughout the journey of a user in terms of them reaching a goal. So for example, you might have a blog that you published that someone reads 6 months before they take an action on your site. The initial touch point of their sort of user journey throughout your website is that initial blog content. They might then jump into another piece of blog content a month later. They might then do nothing for a couple of months and then see a social media post by you, at which point, they then decide to take an action. Oftentimes, the final touch point is the one that's reported on when looking at conversions, but actually looking at this multi-channel approach and understanding how your content has been used throughout the journey of someone to lead up to a donation or an action on your site is really, really important, and can really set the context of why content like your awareness content, your sort of top of funnel content plays a role in your conversions. So it's definitely not something to be overlooked, and I definitely encourage taking a look at multi-channel conversions if you can in Google Analytics. And then finally, it's reviewing. So that whole process is the previous 5 steps. It's sort of part of the cycle, but it's not the final point. You definitely want to review the content after you've published it. As I said before, you want to assess the performance after 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, and really understand how that content is performing. Is it fulfilling all the requirements that you had previously? Is it informational piece of content that users are engaging with? Are they understanding? Are they spending time on that page and reading the content? If not, what are the changes that you can make? Are there optimizations? Are there tweaks that you can make to sort of improve that? Or is it the opposite and that content's performing really well and you've nailed the sort of content production process, in which case, how do you then go about creating more content that sort of leverage that success? I think it's important to think of content from an organic perspective is a cycle. You want to continually be either producing new content or optimizing existing content. It's never sort of static. You set it and forget it, and that's the content on our site. It's a continually evolving process over time. So that's it. That's the content production process that we would recommend in a nutshell. We'll now move over to some Q&As if everyone has any.
Cool. Thanks so much, Rob and Tom. That was awesome. Really comprehensive framework. So thanks so much for that. Let's dive into some questions. So if you've got questions, then just open the Q&A tab at the bottom and write your questions there. I saw about halfway through someone called Laura raise their hand, but there are no fewer than 3 Lauras on this call, so I'm afraid I'm not able to see which of you it was. So questioning, Laura, do you want to drop your question into the Q&A and we'll make sure we get it answered there. But the first question that we are going to answer, or ask rather, and then you can answer, is from Bex at Dementia UK. And her question is, what's the best way to visualize the SEO research so that clinical teams and other teams can see why this web content is a priority and not just a nice to have? So I guess that's about making the case for SEO research and why this content is needed. And it's not just like a sort of optional thing to create. Rob, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, sure. So I think a key part of that is around the keyword research, and really making sure that the keyword research is sort of nailed on. So if you've got a full understanding of the potential amount of search volume that's out there, you can sort of quantify the amount of potential that each content topic has and turn it from oh, wouldn't it be nice if we have this on our site, to, if we're not producing this content, we're potentially missing out on X thousand searches per month, X thousand visitors per month. And really sort of understand, how many users that you could be gaining and how many people could be then converting into either service users or donators, whatever it might be. So understanding that keyword research is quite important, I'd say. Tom, would you agree with that?
Yeah, basically just adding on what Rob said, you can use the search volumes as a really good way to justify to those members of staff that this is how many people are searching for these really, really important things that we could tell them all about. And you can add all of those search volumes up and make cumulative search volumes. Bex, you're from Dementia UK, it looks like. So for argument's sake, if you look at the topic of dementia symptoms, you'll have lots of synonyms of dementia symptoms. What are the symptoms of dementia? What are the main symptoms of dementia? All of these different keywords, you can sum all of those up and show the cumulative search volumes for various broad topics. And that can be really, really effective at getting a bit of buy-in from your organization and saying, look, we could be reaching this many people per month if only we were to produce this type of content. That's quite a broad topic. Of course, you probably already have symptoms on your website, but that type of approach would work for all different subtopics in there too.
Excellent. The next question is from Eva, who has got a great question. If you have good quality video content that lives on your site, how can you best optimize this for SEO? For example, transcript, converting it into an article.
Do you want me to go or you, Rob?
You go for it, Tom.
So there's multiple ways, really. You can host video content on something like Vimeo, and you can use the tools within Vimeo to be able to describe what the content is about, use an accurate description of what the content is about. And usually, in an ideal world, that's going to match what somebody's searching for. So if you produce a piece of content about a common question that people have, then your description and your title and the various tags you're adding to it will also be contributing to that as well. So then you put that video on that page with all that already integrated into that video. And as you say, you could add things like a transcript and content around that as well. And all of that plays a really, really good role in boosting that video overall. Typically, you're going to put that video on a page where it makes logical sense and you're going to sort of outline the context of it. You don't often just put a video on a page with no context around it. So it's all about the context, really. It's all about introducing it. If you've produced that piece of content in response to keyword research, then it will be much, much more impactful than if you produce a video and then try and work backwards and try and find keywords. So it'd always be not reactive, but proactive. my recommendation.
Cool. Would you add anything, Rob?
Yeah, I think that's spot on from Tom. I think, there's other sort of forms of keyword research. If you're looking to optimize content for YouTube, for example, some of the sort of paid tools that we have access to can look at sort of a separate set of data for YouTube specifically, so you can understand what people are searching for on platforms like that. But generally speaking, all the points Tom covered in terms of the title and the description and the sort of keywords used throughout those, that's absolutely the sort of the main approach that we take to optimizing video content.
Cool. So the next question is from Dan. What are your thoughts on SEO plugins such as Rank Math, as it seems to want us to shoehorn the keyword throughout the page to score a high SEO score, which in turn makes it less readable for our audience? So yeah, that's really interesting one. There's other plugins that do a similar kind of job to that. Tom, what's your take on that?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Rank Math and Yoast are two WordPress plugins that have, Yoast in particular has a traffic light system where it encourages you to do things for both readability and for SEO. Now, it's really important to understand that the tools in Rank Math and Yoast, they're just a guide. If you don't think that that is authentic, then absolutely don't do it. Don't try to follow keyword density rules. Don't try to fall for the green lights that it might show if you were only to stuff this keyword in unnaturally. You want to write authentically. And actually, the idea of keyword stuffing and keyword density, those are really outdated ideas. It's more about just the guide of giving you some hints. Are you sure that you've mentioned this keyword enough times, for example? Because if you are writing a really comprehensive piece of content, surely it makes logical sense that you've got that keyword in there a few times. If it doesn't make logical sense, fine, ignore it. You can definitely overrule Rank Math would be my recommendation.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think plugins like that are often more useful for sort of technical SEO, making sure that sort of the basics are met in terms of having a page title and meta description and some of those sort of technical SEO basics. But in terms of actual content SEO, as Tom said, it's really more of a subjective matter to make sure that your content is the most comprehensive and the most useful for users. Those sorts of plugins won't be able to understand that. So taking it with a pinch of salt, I would definitely say is the way to go for that.
Yeah, it's almost like we're looking for a kind of really quick score to say that this content is really good. And if we get the score, then we're happy to move on. But I think the process that we've tried to get across today is it's much more sort of human, I suppose. You're bringing teams together, you're brainstorming, you're thinking of ideas, you're trying to think of things from the user's point of view. So yeah, that's the way to go. Okay, so the next question is from Holly Patel from National Deaf Children's Society. Hi, Holly. And the question is, do you have any top tips to specifically optimize content to appear in Google's featured snippets? Rob, do you want to take that first?
Yeah, really good question. And definitely something we have some recommendations for. So featured snippets, generally speaking, you have to be one of the pages that ranks on the sort of top 10, the sort of first page of the results in order to rank for a featured snippet. So I think fundamentally the content on your site has to be really, really good and performing really well already. But the way in which you can target the featured snippet specifically is through how you structure that content. Often Google likes to see things like a heading followed by an immediate answer to a question in a paragraph. So as I mentioned, with optimizing your opening paragraph, it might be, what is anxiety? That could be the heading. And then directly underneath that, you would answer that question in the following paragraph. Anxiety is, and then give a good comprehensive answer. You also have things like numbered lists or bullet points that Google also really appreciates and often uses for featured snippets. So I guess making sure that your content is organized in quite a structured way is probably the best way of looking for those featured snippet optimizations.
I don't think there's much more I can add to that. I think that's everything.
Comprehensive. Okay, the next question is from Tom, which I'm fairly sure is not our Tom just planting questions. Let's go ahead on that basis. And the question is repeated content something to worry about for SEO ranking? So for example, you create a new advice page on a topic on which you have a longer page, and some of that content is almost word for word similar. I've heard this is not good for ranking, but it seems unavoidable sometimes if you're creating new ways of spinning content. Tom, do you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think I understand what you mean. And I think it's absolutely fine when it's not the entire article. You're always going to have content that you need to duplicate from a longer form article into another one. That's absolutely normal. When it does become an issue is when that entire page is targeting the same keywords as another page. Let's use an example here. Let's say we've got top foods to eat if you have cancer. And then you might discuss in that, I don't know, oily fish. And then you might also produce another page about oily fish. So you might be worrying, well, we've got some of the same content in this. One's a roundup of different foods and one's specific to oily fish. Well, in that roundup, you're probably going to say less than 250 words about that because you don't want it all to be about oily fish, but you just need to link through to that bigger page on oily fish. So that would be the second page would be targeting the search term eating oily fish if you have cancer. I don't know if that works or not, by the way. I don't know if that's good for diet. And the other one would be diet if you have cancer or if you are a cancer patient, for example. So they are quite distinct from one another. Hopefully that answers the question a bit.
Cool. Anything to add, Rob?
No, I just echo the same thing that Tom said. I think, yeah, as long as you're differentiating the core keywords that each page are targeting, then you should be fine. If you're sort of trying to take the same page and duplicate it just every year, then that's when you'll see some problems. But if you're taking subsections of that content and break it into its own page and writing comprehensively and usefully, then that's absolutely fine.
Cool. So the next question then is from Parenting for Faith. I'm nearly 3 months into my job as a digital marketing officer for a small charity, so you'll be busy then. We have well over 300 pieces of content on our site, some of which I can see should or could be performing well in Google, but we haven't had SEO expertise in the past, so anything performing well is doing so by chance. I'm keen to optimize more of our existing content, and the team is positive about me doing so. How would you recommend I go about doing this? For example, prioritizing which posts to tweak, strategy, etc. We do love kind of kill, keep, and combine on this kind of thing. Tom?
Yeah, sure. So there's two things that I'd recommend doing. The one is a content audit, and two is keyword research. One, the content audit, you can look at all of your pages and look at how much traffic each of those pages has got and identify what your minimum threshold would be. Say, for argument's sake, 1 page view a year, that would be 365 page views for the whole year. If that's your minimum threshold for whether that content is useful or not, whether it's good, then you could theoretically use that as an indicator to determine this is all the content that is not performing well. This is all the content that sort of is. This is all the content we should maybe leave as it is. Then you do keyword research and you want to have a look at, are people actually searching for the things that we're talking about? You want to try and match those keywords to the content that you already have. It's going to be natural that a lot of content you have doesn't really match any commonly searched terms. That's sometimes fine if it's got another purpose, if you accept that the reason that's there is for other reasons. But if it doesn't have any reason to be live, you can use that as a really good justification to say, yeah, let's put that in the kill pile. And if it does have reason, then you can say, look, this is the amount of search volume there is available. And we can use these keywords to start optimizing that content. That would be my strategy for identifying and moving into the next phase before you go about optimizing. Rob, is there anything else you wanted to add there?
No, I completely agree with that. I think the only thing I'd say when looking at performance across site-wide, using things like a bulk export from Google Analytics to just see sort of organic performance, but then also potentially performance across other channels. If it's not performing well organically, it might be performing well from your paid media or your email marketing. You don't want to remove content that's performing well through those channels. So I guess it's good to just take that into consideration as well. But yeah, generally speaking, understanding what content's performing well, what's not performing well, working out what you can cull and what you can't. That's the best place to start.
Awesome. And then the last question that we've got time to answer today is, our charity's focus is selling charity Christmas cards. This is from Alicia. We don't necessarily have information to impart like most other charities. How would you create useful content around this? We are worried that our customers are getting buy this card fatigue. Yeah, Tom, would you take that?
Yeah, absolutely. So you've joined a webinar about informational content when a lot of the keywords on your site is going to be what we call transactional. People looking to take an action when they search for something, buy Christmas cards, buy charity birthday cards, etc. Oh, sorry, you're just focused on charity Christmas cards. And so that means that a whole segment is focused on transactional keywords and not actually informational keywords. It would really depend on the keyword research to determine whether or not there is any search volume for informational search terms around Christmas cards. These could be things like, I don't know, making Christmas cards with your children as an activity, or anything that's quite sort of light touch related to Christmas cards. I don't know if there's search volume for that, but you would very much need to go and do that brainstorm process first. Think about things like Christmas card activity making, things like that. How can I buy Christmas cards to support young people, or things like that? Then do the keyword research and validate, are people searching for this or not? If they are, go ahead and build that content. Otherwise, it might be the case that you are in a very, very, very specific niche that people aren't searching for questions about that. And that's fine. You just sort of have to adjust your strategy accordingly.
Yeah.
Well, listen, 2 minutes to go. Oh, sorry, Rob, you got anything to add?
Nope, sorry, just saying I completely echo that.
Yeah, good stuff. Okay, well, 2 minutes to go. I think that's a great place to wrap up. Thanks so much for all your time, everyone, and for joining us on today's SEO webinar. If you're interested in getting some help with your SEO, then just Google Platypus Digital SEO, because of course we rank pretty highly for that. Or drop me a line at matt@platypusdigital.com. We'll be forwarding recording links and slide links and stuff, so look out for that. Otherwise, thanks so much for your time, and we'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.